Welcome to Meet, Act, and Part, a Masonic podcast hosted by Midnight Freemasons Greg Knott, Darin Larners, Todd Creason, and Bill Hostler. The views, opinions and experiences that are expressed by the hosts or guests as individual Freemasons do not reflect the official position of any Grand Lodge, appendant body, or Masonic authority to which the hosts or guests belong. And now on with the show.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another exciting episode of Meet, Act, and Part. This is episode 59. How should I dress for Lodge? And real quick, we'll introduce ourselves as your co-hosts. I am Greg Knott.
Bill Hostler.
And I'm Darin Larners.
Well, happy fall, everyone. It's as we record this, we've already passed the mark in September to start fall, and boy, the weather turned here, at least in central Illinois. Seems like pretty quick. Within a week or so, we got that fall weather going. And, that kind of makes me lead into the discussion we're going to have Bill take the lead on is weather and, what should I be wearing? All of a sudden I'm wearing a jacket outside and, not my shorts anywhere. I literally put on a pair of jeans for the first time the other day since May. The good news is they fit. So, you never know how these things go. But anyway, we were kind of brainstorming ideas, and Bill suggested this one. How should we dress for Lodge? So, Bill, we're going to let you take it away.
We've heard for years it's the internal versus external when it comes to in an apprentice degree, which I personally know is not meaning dress. But so many brethren on either side of the argument will use that piece of ritual to base their case on. And right now, it's at least in America, I don't know about anywhere else in the world, it's kind of a discussion as to how you should dress to go to Lodge. Should you dress in a business suit and give Lodge a respect like you would going to church or your house of worship? Or is business casual all right? Like as you wear it these days at work, since most businesses are business casual these days. Or do you feel like you can just wear your t-shirt and a pair of sweats like you're going to Walmart? This is where we are today, and I'm sure each of us has our own opinion. And I thought this would be a great topic to see which way we should go. Should we dress for Lodge? Should we wear business casual, or does anything go? What are your thoughts, brethren?
Well, as I was thinking about this today, I'm one that I don't normally wear suits. I'm retired now, but even in my day job, I only wore suits when we had a board meeting. And so we were down to business casual every day at work. In terms of a lodge, last night we had a degree at St. Joseph Lodge, and I'm the only idiot in the room that didn't have a jacket on. And so I should have. I just didn't. I wore business casual. I guess I didn't think about it. You know what? Dressing up brings me flashback to ill-fitting clothes and ill-fitting shoes from when I was a boy, having to dress up to go to church. And, for whatever reason, and yeah, I wore the husky size when we went to Sears. I've never been a big dresser-upper. And I don't mind it, I think, once I get the suit on and stuff. But there's almost a little bit of sense of dread if I have to go somewhere dressed up in a suit and tie. But once I put it on, I'm fine. But so, yeah, that's, from just a generalistic approach, that's where I fall. But Darin, on the other hand, Darin does a great job of really setting the example here in our local lodges of dressing up. And but I'll let him address that himself.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, I try to dress up even for the stated meetings, definitely degrees or any other special events. I'm going to throw on a suit and tie just because I think, I've never really thought of it as setting an example. It's just who I want to portray myself as, and that I take, Freemason seriously, and I am reverent to it. I think that's why I tend to dress up. Plus, I mean, I'll be honest, fellas, it's nice to dress up and have your lady look at you a little differently than normal. So, there's an added bonus there. So I'm just, throwing that out there for the brothers who may be on the fence. I bet your lady loves you dressed up. I'm just saying.
Well, and see, and I kind of fall in the middle, because when I first became a Freemason, everybody in the lodges, at least up north, and at least in Fort Wayne where I was, they wore suits. And to monthly stated meetings, or like York Rite or Scottish Rite. And for degree work, we wore full tuxedos. And in fact, when I was made master of my lodge, I wore a tuxedo. But now, since I've moved down here to the South, things are a little more, not everywhere, but it's a good mark. They're a little bit more laid back. And now, and a lot of guys will wear business casual, or some, like some of the brethren who are, a little bit more out in the country, or who have a rural job, they tend to just wear blue jeans and a good clean shirt. And to be perfectly honest, brethren, I always loved dressing up, but I've almost gotten to the point where I like just going in a pair of khakis and a polo shirt even better, because it's just plain easier. And I guess we have to decide as a fraternity, are we, do these men who wear pretty much business casual on a daily basis, do they go home from their job and then they put on a suit? Or do they just go home, put on a pair of jeans or sweatpants or whatever? Or do we just let them come as they are? I mean, it's the fact that even churches these days, the church I attend down here, just down the road, they wear, no one, maybe even the preacher occasionally wears a suit. But for the most part, most people wear anything from shorts and a t-shirt all the way up to what we call business casual. And nobody really blinks an eye. Is this a societal thing? Or is this just something we have to do in reverence to the craft? Or how do we work it? I mean, is it kind of as a come as you are? I guess it just really depends on your lodge and the feelings of the brethren within it. But I think, it's something that needs to be discussed, at least in a broad sense, and then let the chips fall where they may for your local level. But it is kind of an interesting question.
I think, Bill, you've summarized it perfectly. It's sort of one of those things that I always, Darin and I have talked about this a couple times, that all Freemasonry is local, or to me, the only Freemasonry that really matters is the local. And so each locality probably has its own flavor of what they expect for a dress code. I'm a member of Naval Lodge in Washington, D.C., though I tell to make it. And the Grand Master of Washington, D.C. has put a lot of effort into emphasizing the dress code. And as I've read through his emails, and I forwarded a couple of those to you guys, I think what he's trying to do is just reestablish the importance of not only the dress, but of the craft in general, and that the dressing up can help, enhance that general attitude towards the craft. And I think he's right. I think I noticed last night at our degree, despite the fact that I was the only one without a coat, I did at least have business casual. It does change the attitude of men in the room, versus Monday, we actually had a stated meeting, and, there was a potpourri of how different people dressed. And so I do think the dress is important to help set the tone for a meeting. That said, I think each locale is probably driven by local customs as to what maybe they, expect of their members and things like that. But I'm going to give it to Darin to see what he thinks.
Yeah, Greg, to your point, I think especially in a degree, the dress code sets the scene. It can add to, the mystique, especially if a lodge were to be all in tuxedos, as Bill kind of talked to, and to your point, in many jurisdictions, tuxedo is what they need to wear. It's the dress code in that grand jurisdiction. So as I've gotten older, I'm not as hardcore about it. I will say I'm at the point where I'd much rather see the brother at the lodge, regardless of his attire, than have him be absent. What irritates me is that I think that what you essentially are doing in the degree, especially that first degree, their initiatory degree, the EA degree, is you have a candidate coming into the lodge and you want to display the character of your lodge and how you put on that degree. And I think that when you have a lodge and candidate shows up, he's in flip-flops, like a tank top and some shorts, and the lodge isn't dressed very much better. I'm not going to talk ill about the brothers, but I just think that it's just kind of blasphemous to have a degree and be dressed in that manner. It just, at least, make an effort. And I'm not saying dress to the nines. I'm not saying that, you have to even have a suit and a tie on, but at least make an effort to make yourself presentable. That's all I'm asking.
I mean, and I agree that, especially for degree work, especially the apprentice degree, we're making an impression on the brother, or soon-to-be brother, who will be hopefully becoming active in our lodge. But in a way, it's like the dress is just part of that situation we need to use to impress him. I mean, if we could be dressed in tuxedos or even morning dress with the top and hat tails, but if no one knows their words and they argue over where you're supposed to stand, or the argument, and if the building looks like it's ready to fall down or has that old man smell that a lot of them have, that's just as equally as important. Well, let me bring this to you guys too. Just a thought I had a couple minutes ago. Even if it's just for degree work, what if we had lodges come up with the idea of, when they're doing the degree work, have everybody wear a robe? Now, because to be perfectly honest, when I was going through the degrees, I halfway expected that. I guess you hear all the things about the underworld and all. I expected everybody to be in like a robe with a hood. And my college fraternity, that's the way they dressed in the initiation. And I guess in a way that would put everyone on the level. You would, underneath that robe, you could be wearing flip flops and a Jimmy Buffett shirt and a crop top and a pair of shorts. Or you could be in a tuxedo, but really nobody knows underneath. That would almost make it to where we're all equal. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I think you're onto something. I mean, part of it, let me just back up a little bit. And to when Darin, and we've both seen it, probably all three of us have seen it, the candidate that shows up in the flip-flops and the, but sometimes I'm like, well, did we even tell them what the expectation was? I think so many times, we get all tied up in, who's bringing the dinner and who's doing the parts in the degree and is the lodge unlocked and all that logistical things that we don't even tell the candidate, hey, you might want to show up in, the minimum business casual, because usually they'll meet the expectation if we let them know. And so sometimes I think we stop there. I think, if you think about the candidates themselves, they dress in certain ways for the degrees in the Blue Lodge. And the whole point of that is to your point, Bill, is to illustrate the equalness of them coming through the lodge. That's part of the, or illustration of what they're wearing. But part of that is, to illustrate that they are equal coming in. And so I think there's something there, Bill. Again, I kind of go back to that local control, theory that, each lodge I still think has to probably come up with what they want to do. Their Grand Lodge may have a specific set of expectations, so it's not always that local. But I think if there's not, like in Illinois, there's no dress code. There's implied at times, but, you have to do it. I was just thinking when I went to the Supreme Council meeting in August, there was a specific dress code. I mean, they tell you exactly, we wear tuxedos with tails, and they outline exactly, it should have these certain components to it. And, well, that's cool. I didn't have a problem with it. It told me exactly what to buy and, and what to get. And there was no guessing in it. And in some ways, that's not bad either. If you take the guessing out of the equation and just say, here's what it is, most people just mean it and say, oh, that's fine. I just didn't know. Darin?
Yeah, excellent points, Bill. To your point, Greg and I are in a Masonic body where robes are part of the degree work. So, and it does add a mystical element to it. I think those degrees have great opportunity to be even more mystical, and my hope is to help, us do that. But I think that, to the idea of having maybe hooded robes, maybe by candlelight, if you want to bring a much more esoteric or mystical kind of experience into your lodge, burn some incense, do that sort of thing with the degree, man, that would be, I think, super impressive, to that candidate. But then I always joke with my wife when I get her a birthday gift or a Christmas gift that I keep setting the bar higher and higher, and that at some point I'm gonna fall down. Right. So I think that to that point, once you kind of go down that route, man, you've kind of picked your identity and you got to stick to it, right? Because that's what guys are going to start to expect. But that being said, that's it will bring quality men through the door, and they want to kind of, that's the experience that they want, and you're getting quality guys. It's a win-win, in my opinion. It really is. So,
something I was thinking about with dress, and I can always find a Boy Scout analogy in anything we talk about, and that's the uniform in scouting. And my philosophy is always wanted the kids to wear the uniform if they could, but I was personally never one to really give them any grief if they didn't. I was just glad they came. There was other people that were very vigilant that, the patches should be in a certain way and all this. But the whole purpose of that uniform was to create that sense of identity. And same could be said, as we were alluding to, I think, with a dress code for a lodge. It helps set that identity for the lodge. I mean, I think in some rural areas, it's just common. They may show up in bibs and boots. It's just, that is dressing up. That's how a lot of rural folks, they go to church. And so I think sometimes, even dressing up, you may have to define what that means, and it's not necessarily a coat and tie in every circumstance.
Well, to be perfectly honest, here's a story I haven't told too much, but the night that when I was nearly 500 pounds when I was raised to the sublime degree, and I only had two pair of pants that would fit me at that time, size 64. And one of them was just a pair of like semi-dress pants, and the other was bib overalls I wore driving a truck. Well, that day I went to go put on my pants, my dress pants, and they gave out. And so I ended up going to my Master Mason degree and having my picture taken after the degree work in my bib overalls. So I guess I'm part of that in a way. But it did take me long to figure out I needed to go out and get at least a suit and tie.
I remember in high school, I worked at this Hardee's, and we wore some of those god-awful nylon polyester suits that, looking back, it's like, holy smokes. But, the whole idea was we were presenting this uniform look to the customer. And, we all had the same thing on, more or less, except the managers. They had a shirt and tie. But it was just part of the business. In Freemasonry, it's really no different. It's not a business per se, but yet it's I think Darin's spot on about his, observation that it sets the tone, not only for how you look, but I actually agree with Darin that it I think dressing up gives you those good vibes. And it does make a difference when you see everybody else. Like I say, last night I had a good, nice shirt on, but I was underdressed. And so I felt a little oddball of it. But there was other folks in there that don't always wear suits and ties to other meetings. They had them on. And I think it set that tone last night of, we had a good degree. Candidates came dressed nice. So they were prepared. And I think it does add to that ambiance and other things of the night.
It's sort of like the one time when I was the building manager for the Fort Wayne Masonic Temple, the York-Rite College for Fort Wayne wanted to hold a statewide college event. And the Grand Master was there, and just about every type of York-Rite bling was there. I mean, there's all these people with the letters after their names, And we set it up that we went into the social room, with all the leather seats and the carpet. We had a piano player come in there, and all the men were in in tuxedos, and then all the women were in evening gowns. And they were eating hors d'oeuvres, and they were drinking, sparkling cider or whatever it was, because, of course, we can't have alcohol in the Masonic temple. But, we were all dressed in tuxedos, and it was a very formal and elegant event. And I really felt there was a real vibe in that. And that really set the tone for the rest of that entire day. And I really think that was one of the high points I ever had at really a Masonic meeting. It almost, I was sitting there thinking to myself, this is probably what it looks like back in the 40s and 50s when all the brethren were there. It was a positive energy.
Yeah, it makes, Bill, your statements there make me think of, if you think about dress codes, expectations, and really how they vary drastically between the appendant bodies. I mentioned, going to Scottish Rite Supreme Council, you're in tails for a good part of it. The widow's sons, they have their own dress with, usually a leather vest and, nice jeans and a nice dress shirt they'll have on with their various patches and things. And, the York Rite, you might have a red jacket and Royal Arch, a purple and cryptic, and, a uniform in the Knight Templar degree. So there's really just a wide variety. The shrine, you dress up for part of it, and other parts is casual. And, I hadn't thought about how many variations there are till, you got to talking there, Bill, about Fort Wayne. It's interesting. Here's a question for you guys. Do you think, going back, you look in the 1950s and say before, they were all dressed up whenever they basically left the house. Do you think that goes in cycles, over time, where fashion fads come and go, but do you foresee a time when it'll just be the fad to dress back up again?
Well, if you, was it 10, 15 years ago, the Grand Lodge of Indiana did a study, and I know several other Grand Lodges was doing ones about the same way. And it was basically focused on millennials in that area. Now, that was long before Gen Z ever even attempted to become a Freemason. And it was shown in the surveys that most of those young men wanted to dress up in suits. And that's the way they felt like you should go to, because to them it was something bigger than themselves, and they wanted to show reverence. And a lot of them did. If you think about it, that's right about the time the traditional observant lodges kind of took off, is around that time when the younger men started coming in. Now, I don't know, because I haven't been to a regular lodge in a while, thanks to my health, but I don't know whether these brethren are still dressing up or whether they just said, screw it, and then they wear their, whatever. But it was at least one point something that they definitely wanted to do. And so but I can't see them changing their minds unless we changed it in a negative way.
I think, at least to my understanding, the teal lodges that I'm aware of are still, following that kind of stricter dress code, if you will, Bill.
But this was it wasn't in just TO lodges, but it was just brethren of regular Masonic lodges too.
Yeah. I think there's something to be said about dressing up for lodge. Now, so let's kind of address the elephant in the room, if you will. I think that maybe some of the reason guys aren't dressing up for lodge is there's really not a reason to dress up for lodge. If you're going to lodge and you're spending an ordinary amount of time just talking about bills or building repairs and, all the other mundane stuff. And I know we wanted to keep this episode positive, so I'll try not to go too negative, but
I think it's a valid point.
What I'm trying to say is that when we're not giving guys the reason to dress up by having a dinner maybe beforehand, or, having a festive war, or even maybe just saying, hey, after the meeting, we're going to cross the street, and wouldn't it be great for us all to show up, kind of dressed up like this and have some refreshment and then, be on our way. So I think, the one thing that dressing up does is that it attracts people's eyes to you, right? So if you are in your community and you're kind of out in force and you're all dressed up and guys or gals are looking at you, isn't that kind of nice? To be a focal point? And isn't that how we try to get ourselves back out into the community, by attracting attention to ourselves? We're so used to just being in our lodge buildings, and we've got when we meet on the front of the building, and then we're like, well, why aren't any guys coming in? well, we're not doing anything, or when we try to do something, it's half-ass, and we look desperate. I mean, and I'll state this to my point here is until I met my wife, I was always about being on the back of Greg's truck with the Mason sign, dressed up, waving or whatever, and she pointed out, she's like, dude, you're all alone, right? How desperate does that look? How creepy does that look? And I was like, you've really got a good point there. If we're not going to show up in force, if your lodge isn't going to show up there and be with you, man, it looks kind of bad, doesn't it?
All they were doing is just locking their car door as they drove by you.
Probably. I mean, and we're in this truck and some weirdo's throwing candy at them. I'd be running away too.
Well, at least you got rid of that thing that said free candy on the side.
That was a nice paint job, Bill.
I know. Darin again brings up a good point. You can imagine, like on a Monday or Tuesday night in your little town, our little towns, that we go into the restaurant with suit and ties. People are going to say, "Well, what are you guys up to?" or "What's going on?" Especially when they know us.
Where's the funeral?
Yeah, who died? It was like, "Oh no, we're going to the Masonic Lodge." Oh, I didn't even know you guys were still around, which is a very typical response. So yeah, I think, Darin, your point's exactly spot on, that it's our perception to the public to, A, let them know we're here, but the other is, hey, they may ask, oh, I didn't know you guys were still there. We might attract a candidate or so.
Well, and most of the most successful Masonic bodies around the world, like just two of them that come into my mind right now, is Prince Hall lodges. They have a dress code. I mean, and it's a strict dress code. And the United Grand Lodge of England has that dress code of, black suit, white shirt, and it used to be just a black tie in honor of the World War I dead. But now that they've kind of went off the rails and came up with their own tie, so they can wear that in lodge. They look good. And Prince Hall always looks good. They make us look pitiful sometimes. But they're all successful. They don't just take anybody. They don't, and they dress for success, and they show what they reap from it.
One of my best Masonic experiences is going to Prince Hall third degree with my good buddy Dustin. He was very much involved with visiting Prince Hall lodges, to the point where there was a point where he was looking actually to switch membership from our Grand Lodge to the Prince Hall affiliated Grand Lodge here in Illinois. That didn't happen, but I know that he's still in touch with a lot of his Prince Hall brothers back here, even though he's out in Vegas right now. And I just, to your point, it was all of their officers dressed to the nines. There was a past master there, same thing. They're all in their dark suits. Again, their candidates had same issue kind of with ours. They were varying degrees of dress, but they conferred. At the degree I went to, they conferred probably, I know this is blasphemous from our point of view, especially our Grand Lodge's point of view, but I think it had to be 10 to 15 candidates just lined up that they did a third degree with, and brought them all in individually one at a time and put them down. And we're nice, at least in our grand jurisdiction, where you get a padded implement. At Prince Hall, it's straight up the gavel, man, and no padding whatsoever. So you can kind of imagine how that must, the sound that makes, and hearing that for 15 guys and seeing them kind of wince when I was happy at that point to be not going through a Prince Hall degree. But I will say, their work was excellent. At least here in Illinois at Prince Hall, affiliated lodges are FNAM. They may all be FNAM. I'm not sure about that. I'm sure hopefully somebody will listen to this and correct me if I'm wrong. But in any case, there's that much a difference in the work, and then kind of how they confer the degree. For example, in our degrees here in our jurisdiction, the master comes down the dais and then goes through the this arch that each steward has made with his rod onto the floor before, obligating the candidate. And in the Prince Hall, the stewards were literally behind him, forming that arch kind of over him as he obligated the candidates there. So yeah, it's just kind of a crazy degree. But the best, really quick, sorry to take up so much time, but the best part of that degree was when they brought in one guy. I wrote an article about this, but they brought in a guy for his third. He's going through the ruffians, and it goes to the first, it was either the first or second ruffian, and the guy's like, give me the Paso masturbation. And he just gave it to him. He just, before his conductor could even, stop him, he blurted it out. And this old grandmaster that was sitting next to Dustin and I thought he was going to have a heart attack. He was like Sanford and Son grabbing his chest, rolling around. I thought he was literally dying. It was the best thing. It was so, and you're trying not to laugh, but man, and they're all like, you gotta be shitting me. It was just like, I'm sorry. It was hilarious. It was like of all the things I've ever seen in Freemasonry, I never thought I would ever see that at a Prince Hall degree. Nonetheless, I'll never forget that moment. It was so great.
I can't let a story go by since we're talking about dress.
Is this? I know where this is going. Yeah. I know where it's going.
We're at Darin and I are at Champaign, Illinois, Western Star, number 240 Lodge for a degree. And it
was Brian Clark's third degree. I was Brian's mentor.
All right. So you were junior deacon, I think. At least for the opening.
Maybe for the opening I was, but I was one of the fellow craft. I wasn't one of the main three, but I was one of the one that went to, King Solomon in my white gloves and my leather apron in Illinois at that part when we're pleading for King Solomon, to not kill us. Essentially, we go down on our knees while giving the due guard of a fellow craft, and I'm there. Greg, I don't know. Were you a fellow craft also, or
probably?
I don't know where you were, but all of a sudden I go down and I hear this rip. I had split my pants from my taint to my crack. It was full glory. So I had to basically, I'm wearing the apron and I had to go excuse myself and drive home wearing the apron. And I keep thinking to myself, is from Champaign to, I was in St. Joe at the time. So it's a good 20-minute drive from, where we're at to my house. And then it's 20 minutes back. So I had to go and change my pants.
It was classic.
There was a friend of mine went through it with me, and his dad was a Mason, and he was his conductor. And he was wearing probably a pair of jeans. I don't remember it's been so long, but he had a Western belt on. And I invited a friend of mine who was the grand lecturer, and everybody was already freaking out because he was sitting out there. And we're going through, and the next thing I know, I hear this laughing. Nothing ever comes. Whatever, I'm already, crapping myself. And turned out, long story short, that as what they were laughing about was his belt buckle broke and his pants went clear down to the floor and he wasn't wearing underwear. So he showed his gain right there, and yeah, I guess that would have been a little embarrassing.
Why the hell aren't you going to wear underwear to a degree that you're working? And no, I
guess he figured he didn't have to undress. He didn't have to undress. So.
I guess, but man, yeah, I don't know. I guess I subscribe to the, my mom always telling you to wear clean underwear. So if you're in an accident, at least you're clean underwear. Lord knows that where else the rest of you is, but
yeah, since we're having a little fun now with some of this, what gets me, some of our degrees have costumes and things that you wear. And of course, most of them are from the 1940s or before. And there ain't a chance in hell that 99% of them are going to fit over my body. I mean, a couple of those, I've been at Scottish Rite degrees, and I put one of those robes on, you just hear this rip. I'm like, oh man, I hope I didn't blow it out too bad. So, yeah. So proper fitting clothes, as as we talk about our theme here, what to wear to lodge, maybe proper fitting clothes are one of the key things is to keep in mind as well.
We're all Masons. We all tend to eat so much, but we seem like we've had a lot of wardrobe dysfunction talk about that right here.
Well, I think, to Greg's point, of proper fitting clothes. And at that point, I was probably the heaviest I've ever been in my life. So I was pushing probably maybe like 280, which, for me was pretty big. So, I had pants that I was trying to squeeze my fat ass into because I hadn't brought pants the proper size, and that's what I got. So I guess it was the lesson I got to lose some weight.
This does bring up another idea, though. Here's a question I pose. Okay, you got people who dressed business casual or worse, or you have a guy who's wearing an old suit he got from Goodwill that's not really tailored to him. The pants are too long. It's like baggy. It looks terrible. Which is actually worse? That he wears clothes that fits him that aren't formal, or that he wears a formal suit that looks like it was his grandpa's and he borrowed it?
Well, boy, that's a good question, Bill. I would say, honestly, the guy in the suit, at least he's making the effort. And yeah, maybe it's a ill-fitting Goodwill suit, but maybe that's all the guy could afford. And he wanted to dress up, and he wanted to, try to impress his brothers. So, but
and I agree. I mean, there's no shade on the fact that it was a cheap suit. But maybe, some of his brethren should be able to tell him, says, hey, if you take it over to this fellow over here, he's a great tailor. Maybe he can set it up for it. But do they?
They probably don't say anything. It's, I guess that sort of brings up a point, for the most part, nobody says really too much if you don't wear the expected outfit. I mean, I've seen a little bit of people get that look in their eyes like, well, use me as an example. Why the hell didn't Greg dress up? I'm sure. And me, I would never say anything. I'd be the last person in the world to say anything. I'd just be glad they're there.
There was a master in my mother lodge that did in kind of a snide way. And I think that was when I finally, after a couple months of being a master mason and an officer, I went out and found a suit to fit me, so, and but that was just his way,
Yeah.
One of those Westgate things. But
well, Bill, your original question for us tonight as a theme was, dressing up for lodge, or should there be a dress code, more or less. But you also posed the question, the internal versus the external. And, that you kind of, not you personally, but I'm saying we walk that fine line of, is it only the emphasis on the dress, or is it the internal qualifications of a man, that we're more concerned?
That's a big gripe of mine. That's been one of my biggest pet peeves for years, is when somebody will take a piece of the ritual and bastardize it, pardon the language, to make some kind of wackadoodle point that they have, try to plead their case. I mean, we all know that if you actually pay attention to that, the internal versus the external is about the person's character versus how he looks or his status amongst society. But so many brethren will use that to, well, I don't want to dress up, but remember, it's the internal, not the external. It's sort of like the same thing to me as, they used, when they were trying to take guns out of Masonic lodges, like a brethren would, they would say, well, they say that you should bring in nothing offensive or defensive with you into the lodge. And I says, that's not for you. That's, at one point it was you, but it's not. I said, so should we have like a metal detector at the beginning of the lodge? How many of you guys are carrying pocket knives here right now? Should we confiscate those and maybe, make sure you don't have those when we walk in the lodge? Or do we run you through a metal detector, make sure that you have no type of metal? It's just, one of the things that they'll take, they can't learn any other Masonic lesson other than trying to take a piece of ritual and form it to the point to where they're trying to make some terrible, defense for their actions. It's been a big pet peeve of mine for a long time.
Well, we're getting long here in the hour. We'll kind of sum up. So I don't think we have 100% consensus, and I think that's just fine because I think it depends on the situation, the locale, perhaps the degree or the meeting function as to what your dress code will be. So again, for me, I'm kind of laissez-faire. If I want to go along with the plan, but if somebody doesn't, I probably won't say anything. So that's sort of my summation. Bill, what about you?
Well, I really didn't expect to have to come up with an all-telling answer for this when I brought it up. And it's local. It's what your local lodge or body will accept and agrees on. Or your Grand Lodge mandates. But to be perfectly honest, I'm more worried and uptight and encouraging men to go to their Masonic lodges and participate and be in harmony with them, as long as, and I don't care how you dress, as long as it's, somewhat just you're not wearing a pair of dirty sweatpants and a flip flop and a, I shot JR t-shirt. As long as you go and you're somewhat dignified and when you're willing to participate, that's all I ask for.
I'll be sure to add narrative when you say I shot JR to make sure that the younger generation that possibly may listen to our podcast knows exactly what you're referencing, because
I'm sure I guess I showed my dated a little bit.
That's the I'll just when you say it, I'll just say something like boomer reference, and then we'll just leave it at that.
And maybe put a Wikipedia link or something,
Yeah, that might be a good idea.
And now I'm going to go with my old place.
I guess it's my turn. I do agree with Bill. I'd rather see the brother there, but all that being said, I like dressing up and I like to have my brothers dress up, and I just think there's something special about that brings an extra, I don't want to say seriousness, but an extra
sincerity and purpose in the approach.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, Bill. Sincerity and purpose to a degree, and solemnity, I guess, was the word I was maybe looking for. But so yeah, that's my opinion. And again, I think to Greg's point, setting an expectation for the candidate maybe prior to the degree is crucial in this. And then maybe you can use that to leverage against your brethren to say, okay, I have set the expectation with the candidate that he's to come in a suit, which means we should all be in suits as well. And then, leave it out there as maybe a call to action, if you will. But one of the things that is one of the internal truths about Freemasonry that I hate the saying is, when you're at a third degree and you tell a candidate, well, you get out of Masonry what you put into it. Because I always feel like that's just giving them a way to cop out and not go into meetings, to not, essentially don't come back now, you hear, nice having you, but you get out of what you put. You get out of Freemasonry what you put into it, and I hated that for the longest time until I realized, well, fortunately it's true, right? I get my fulfillment by doing this podcast with you guys, by editing the blog, by my writing, and everything else that I do in an effort to educate my brothers, many of who I'll probably never meet, and they'll just know this voice. And God bless them, because they don't have to see my ugly mugs. So that being said, I feel like there's got to be a better way of saying that and saying that, maybe Freemasonry is reciprocal.
All right. Well, now we've introduced these fancy words along with our fancy dress. I think, we're probably going to close it up. So anyway, we're curious about what your thoughts are this episode. You can go to our Facebook page. And if you have comments on dress, leave us a comment on our Facebook page. And we'd be
we'll
really
know that if you use the thing as the internal, not the external. We know you obviously didn't listen to this podcast.
Yeah, make sure you at least get through 58 minutes of it. So.
Or they're just trying to piss off Bill. That might be it as well.
Too.
That's true.
That might
be one of Bill's internet troll friends, probably. Okay, well, enough on dress. We hope that you dress as you need to go to your lodge. But more importantly, equally importantly, we are really appreciative that you listen to Meet, Act, and Part. If you want to support us on Patreon, you can go to our webpage and do that. And before too long, we'll have another exciting episode of Meet, Act, and Part. Good night.
Thank you for listening to Meet, Act, and Part. For more information about our show, visit our website at www.meetactandpart.com. While there, please consider supporting the show by sponsoring us on Patreon. Until we meet again, may we meet, act, and part.